Hey everybody, and welcome to the Sunny 16 podcast. My name is Aid, and I will be one of your hosts for this evening. I am very pleased to be joined by Claire. How are you doing, Claire?
Evening, Aid. I'm very well, thank you, and always lovely to be here.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. It's been a strange week for me. I've been vaccinated. I've been to the beach. It's been snowing, but hey. What can I say? We've had all the weather in the last few days, and we'll just enjoy it. I guess it's nice to get out and about. It's a little bit opening up a little bit here in England at the moment. Anyway, it's not just us, is it? Of course, because well, actually, I tell you what, I let you do the honours because you've been the one that's been organising our super special guest for this evening, haven't you?
Yes, I sure have. Well, it might be snowy here in Wales and England, but all the way from sunny California, we have Michael Kirchoff who's joining us, and Michael is the editor-in-chief of Analog Forever magazine. He also is an editor for Catalyst and writes for Traverse. And Michael also is a wonderful photographer as well, with an amazing body of work, a diverse body of work, using many different cameras and films as well. So thank you for joining us, Michael, to talk to us about your work and your many, many, many projects.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. It's great to talk to you. Great to meet you. And we got a lot of ground to cover. You're somewhat prolific, which is a fantastic thing from our point of view, because there's plenty to talk about. So much so, in fact, that we've decided together to focus on a subset of your work rather than try and cover it all in one go. But that's all good. So I'm looking forward to a conversation about. There's so much stuff here actually in the things we've been looking at to prepare for this conversation. There's travel, there's photography, there's writing, there's editing, there's any number of interesting things. Claire, where should we dive in?
I think we're going to begin, aren't we? Hearing maybe about the body of work, which is on your website, and we'll be showing some photographs of as we go along. The Enduring Grace project. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, which is, am I right, based around your travels in Russia?
That's correct. Well, An Enduring Grace started, it was born out of my fascination for Russia that I developed when I was a child, actually. I would say, as an American growing up in the 80s, and especially during the Reagan administration, Russia was, they were kind of the foe of the United States, right? I mean, they were the U.S. It wasn't Russia; it was the USSR at the time, and my fascination grew because of the dialogue and the language that was being used during political discussions and newscasts, news reports, both in and around the USSR, because obviously it was made up of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Baltic states, so and on and on. So there was a lot going on, and as a kid, I was really kind of confused by it all. But then any of the imagery that I ever saw, usually the very first image that I would see would be that of Red Square and or St. Basil's Cathedral.
Yeah.
So, and as a kid who grew up in Los Angeles and went to places like Disneyland, whimsical looking structures like St. Basil's Cathedral were really fascinating to me. So to listen to all this negative dialogue about the USSR then, and then see images of this architecture that was just incredible to me, it was really difficult to correlate the two together. Like, if these people were so horrible, how could somebody so terrible create structures like this. And I mean, it went beyond St. Basil's Cathedral, of course, but I use that as an illustration because most people know what that looks like, what that is, and understand that whimsical nature that I'm talking about. So I basically just grew up that way. And as I got older, and the fall of the USSR came about, and Russia became Russia again, and Ukraine became Ukraine again, and the Baltic states, regained their identity, as well as all of the other countries that were involved. My interest continued to grow, and I just decided at one point, I mean, it wasn't until 2000, when did I start? 2007 is when I decided to go there. And I didn't actually intend to go there with the thinking that I was going to be creating a series at all. I went there because I was curious, and when I went there, I simply took photographs, and I just responded to the landscape and the architecture and the travels that I made throughout Russia. And I visited 3 places during 2007 on the very first trip. And I actually started in Kiev, Ukraine. So that was the first destination. From there, I traveled to Moscow, and then I ended in St. Petersburg. And when I arrived, they were all incredible. But when I arrived in St. Petersburg, by that time, I was really, I mean, I showed up being fascinated. And after being in those 3 cities and spending in just those, not even that much time, I was only there for a couple of weeks. And I was, overwhelmed by it all. And I was really pleased with the pictures that I had been taking. Of course, I took film cameras. In fact, I actually took way more than I should have, which is a problem that I have all of the time when I'm traveling. But I actually took a full digital Canon outfit with, a couple of bodies and three or four lenses. But then I had, 3 or 4 film cameras as well with me. So I had a large backpack that was just beyond heavy. So it made, traveling a little bit difficult. But I had a brilliant time. And I decided that on my flight back from St. Petersburg back to Los Angeles, I decided on that flight that I need to return, and I need to explore more of what it was that I was doing while I was there, because I felt like I had started something kind of significant for myself. I didn't know how other people were going to respond to it at all, but I thought I'll be back, and I actually, I went back in 2008. I went back twice in 2009, 2010, 2013, and 2016 in order to continue photographing. So every time I would go, I would be very pleased at what I found, but then I would turn around and discover more places that I wanted to go. And even one of the times I had realized that the Trans-Siberian Railway was a great train route to take as kind of an adventure. When I first started photographing in Russia, I thought, oh, that would be really a great thing to do, but I'm probably never going to get around to doing something like that. And for some reason in 2009, I just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna figure it out and go. And it wasn't, you have to plan everything out ahead of time. So I actually traveled the original route from Moscow to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast via train. And then I made that trip was a little over 3 weeks. And I would stop at various cities along the way and make photographs with whatever time I had. Yeah, it was great, and I recommend it. I like all of the travels that I did there. I did it alone. I would recommend taking somebody with you. It's always nice to have a second pair of eyes, kind of, watching where you're going, watching what you're doing. Because there were things I discovered especially on that trip, that were inherently Russian and not difficult, but occasionally problematic to deal with, because I never really thought about it going in on the whole project. But not only do I not speak the language, you can't read the language because it's a completely different alphabet. It's Cyrillic. So, even going back to the first trip, I mean, I remember landing in Kiev, getting off the plane, getting into my hotel, and immediately kind of repacking everything I had to head out to start taking pictures. And I had my maps all ready to go, and I walked out the hotel door and I pulled out my map and I looked at it, and then I looked at the street sign and I realized that they didn't match up at all because everything there is in Cyrillic. Everything I had was translated into the Latin alphabet for the most part. So I had to develop the process of kind of just knowing which way north, south, east, and west was. After that trip, I carried a compass everywhere I went. And instead of knowing what the names of streets were, I would just count them out on a map. It was 5 blocks this way or 6 blocks that way. And that didn't always work out either, but it made every single trip and every single day an adventure of its own. And during that time, I was really responding to the landscape and, again, the architecture, going back to my fascination with St. Basil's. So I covered all of those places. I ended up also going to not just Russia and Ukraine, but I also went to Belarus. I went to Finland because there was a certain amount of influence that Russia had within the borders of Finland that I discovered while I was there. I also spent time in Estonia and Georgia. And every single place that I went, things were a little bit different. The architecture changed depending on the geography of where you were and the time. Russia has a very long and storied history since its beginning, and architectural styles changed from century to century. So it was interesting to kind of witness that and document that along the way. And again, the pictures that I was taking, I was doing everything with a digital camera, Canon digital camera, a Holga film camera, 120 film camera that I was shooting black and white film in. And then I also took a Graflex XL camera with me that shot Polaroid pack film called 665 that was positive negative. And those were the images that kind of jumped out at me more than anything. And I kind of put them together in a little, a small group when I got back, and that was the beginning of it becoming a body of work. So I just basically built on it every trip after that.
Gosh, there's so much there. I mean, the whole series, the Enduring Grace series, it does show a lot of the beautiful architecture. And from what travel photography is something I'm interested in. It's not something I've really done. And whether you're taking architecture, if you're taking people, because some of your photographs do have people, and maybe we'll talk about some of the individual shots in a moment. There's a certain type of, confidence or way of being to engage with people, particularly, I suppose, if you're not doing like candid shots, you're going to literally, you see someone you like and you want to maybe ask them to take their photo. I mean, there's one image, I don't know where you took it, and there's a gentleman, I don't know, is he outside, he's got a long beard and he's outside a magnificent architectural building. How did you get him to agree to have his photo taken with the language barrier?
I know which image you're talking about. Yeah, that was kind of that was taken on the Trans-Siberian trip, and that happened on a day where I had hired a tour guide to kind of get me from point A to point B to some of the places that I knew about. And then there was kind of some extra time, and I said, well, where do people not want to go? And she took me to just this kind of a promontory point that overlooked the Selenga River, that flowed between Mongolia and into Siberia, the Siberian part of Russia, because that's essentially where that is in Siberia, southern part. And that was the church behind him is, not only did he design the church, he built the church.
Wow.
And he is the priest that presides in the church. And across the street from the church, he built a museum that contains artifacts from, I think he basically said he traveled within 100 miles of where that church is, and he would collect artifacts, religious artifacts that were in the local area. And they're both in the church and the museum across the street. I didn't go to the museum or photograph it because it was basically just kind of a box structure. There was nothing interesting or unique about the structure itself. And I only had, I had limited amount of time. But through the guide, I was able to kind of get him to try to explain to him what I was doing. And of course, the positive print, I'm shooting positive, negative film. So I kept the negatives, but I gave him that positive print. I coded it and gave it to him. So I assume it's probably still in that church somewhere.
You must have been really thrilled. And
yeah, he was confused at first because I was using a camera that he had never seen before.
Yeah.
But because of that, he was also probably a little bit more interested and a little bit more engaged.
Yeah.
And I kind of directed him to look off into the distance. So that it wasn't a kind of, I wasn't looking for the eye contact so much as I was just looking for a portrait of the man standing in front of the building that he had made himself.
That's an incredible story, isn't it? That underpins all of this stuff, and it's and I'm sure you have many others. I have a question, if I may, about the sort of visual style and visual approach that you've taken in this body of work. I mean, you said yourself that there's very much a focus on architecture, which clearly comes through in the work you're showcasing on the website. There's a fantastic consistency to the some of the visual aspects of it. Even some really tangible stuff, like a lot of low positions for taking the shot with a view up at the architecture, and that it for me it sort of it draws the architecture out. It's far more than perhaps a tilt shift lens might that's fully corrected and stuff like that. What drew you to that kind of approach and that kind of sort of visual aesthetic for architectural work? Because it's very, very different from technical architecture work.
Oh, absolutely. It's not anything like any kind of architecture work. Although I've had a few architects tell me that they love what I've done because it doesn't follow that kind of the standard that they all kind of take when documenting a building or a structure of any kind. I didn't, the aesthetic really kind of solidified during the creation of this process and is pretty much carried through almost everything that I've done since. And part of that aesthetic is, even though there's kind of a documentary aspect to it, I have no interest in the reality part of it. If I did, I would have been taking color digital photographs and doing things like using tilt shift lenses and correcting perspective and making sure my horizon line was straight. But again, I had no interest in doing that at all, because again, it kind of goes back to my childhood fascination And when you're a child, everything is kind of larger than life, especially when it's new. You kind of go in just wide-eyed and in amazement to everything that you come across.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of mimic that theme or that idea. And that's why the camera that I was using uses a very wide lens. So I like that kind of cinematic quality to it.
Definitely.
And when you use a wide lens, you have not more limited options, but there's different kind of looks that you're going to get with it. So you're going to get, large expanses of the landscape where like the certain buildings will kind of be small in the frame, or you're really uptight on a building, and with a lot of them that are large, you're looking kind of straight up at them. So they loom in at you, even though they're kind of falling backwards in the frame, they're looming at you because they're very dramatic, and the textures and the tones that I get using that film, and the fact that I basically kind of screw up the negatives while I'm doing this. I mean, first of all, this film was expired when I started using it in 2007, and it's still film that I use now. So the best film that I'm using expired in 2007. So that was the best case scenario. What I'm doing now is the worst case scenario. But I'm still doing it. In using that type of film, there was a certain look that I kind of got, because you get a lot of accidents, a lot of things that don't normally happen when you are shooting pack film that's fresh and clear. So, and then also the way that I treat the negatives while I'm doing that, the way I store them as I'm taking them, a lot of the meandering lines and the textures and around the frame of the photograph, there's that normal Polaroid frame that you'll get with this kind of film, but then there's a lot of extra kind of organic looking meandering lines and forms that occur more often on the edges than in the center, and that's because of how I treat the film while I'm out there. So all of that kind of bunched together while I was developing the body of work, and I realized how much that was just not just the aesthetic of that body of work, but that is an aesthetic that I carry with me always in everything that I do. So
I think it's
those huge lines are part of it as well.
Yeah, I think it's particularly effective for me on some of the Soviet era monuments. There's an image of a large statue with a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, and some soldiers marching underneath it. And even though technically speaking, I know that statue is quite small in the frame, for some reason that's a low viewpoint, and it's and the perspective on it really makes it look like it's the big feature. So it's quite a magic trick, that actually, isn't it, to make real life big things look small in the frame but still come across really big.
Right. And that's what's interesting too about using a wide angle lens like that. I mean, whether you're using film or digital doesn't really matter. But it does often seem like when you're using older vintage lenses that are of that kind, you really get something unique out of them that you wouldn't normally get with like a modern day normal lens. There's a certain there's a little bit of fall off on the sharpness at the edges and the corners, and so things get a little bit soft and dreamy. And that's also carried into like the images that I take for other bodies of work, used with the Holga. So there are tie-ins to all of the bodies of work and all of the collections that I do, where there's kind of a through line, as you will, for everything that it is that I do.
Definitely, because I was going to say I can definitely see it's cinematic, and I was going to say it's quite dreamlike as well. And as you say, with your other bodies that we will come to, the other images I like from this series is you Road to Red Square, and the one, is it in the basilica itself where there's like a hand, I think it's a statue inside, and is there a security guard inside the building, and there's this lovely light streaming through from the rooftop.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That image.
Yeah. Well, Road to Red Square, that particular image, that pretty much is what I would call the signature photograph from the collection. It's, you know, if I was to choose one photograph to represent it, that would be the one, because it, in a way, that's what I was thinking of when I was a child, when I was imagining what it would be like to be someplace like Red Square when I was a kid. That's how it is, you know. It was mysterious. There was a certain kind of dark quality to the architecture and the landscape. Things were, you know, maybe not just mysterious, but ominous to a certain degree. So there was maybe a little bit more frightening as a child. So I really wanted to convey that, and in making that photograph, I was actually laying in the center of the street, of the cobblestone street that leads into Red Square when I took that. So thankfully, I was not hit by any vehicles doing that. But ironically, in order to make that photograph, I was kind of forced into it being that way, because on that trip, that was the start of the Trans-Siberian trip. So I started it in Moscow, and the day that I arrived, I went to Red Square, and it turns out it was closed. And what they do when they close Red Square is they basically fence it off. So there's just, you know, meter after meter of high fencing that surrounds every way to enter there. And of course, I still tried to get in, because that's kind of what I do. And so I circled the entire area a couple of times looking for a way in, and it was impossible. So I still wanted to make a photograph of Red Square during that trip. So that's what I ended up doing. So it kept me outside of the center of the area and put me on the outskirts. So, you know, on the outside looking in, so to speak. And it ended up being the best decision I ever made. So I was really kind of happy that I was kept out at that time.
Did you ever have anyone question what you were doing or come up to you, especially with your quite old and unusual cameras that you had with you, or did that never happen, Michael?
No, that happened. Like I said, the photograph of the priest, he was very interested in what I was doing, you know. And even though that there's a language barrier, everybody kind of people gravitate to objects like that, like a vintage camera.
Yeah.
So language doesn't become the driving force behind the curiosity, right? It's the visual. And a lot of people can still speak English, well, especially in a city like Moscow, but maybe not so well. And like I said, there's some confusion. So there were definitely times, you know, one of the times I was photographing St. Basil's at night, I kind of drew a bit of a crowd while I was doing it. Because of the camera that I was doing, and B, because I was having a hell of a time with the film that I was using. And the failure rate, you know, every year that goes by, the failure rate for this film goes up. And I just happened to have a couple of packs of film with me that were just causing nothing but problems. So I was sitting in front of St. Basil's with a small pile of Polaroid trash in front of me, because none of them were working. I was just having a hard time, and you know, I was clearly not happy about it. So people were kind of, what are you doing? What's wrong? What's the problem? And then when I would finally get something that I liked or would just work at all, I could just hand them the positive print, and still be able to keep the negative. And I was just handing out, prints, whether they worked or not. And people were really fascinated with it because, especially there, nobody had any idea what this was that I was doing, what this film was in any way. So you kind of, you make friends along the way. And there's, like, we've mentioned before, there's a kind of community aspect to doing this kind of work. So it's really easy to attract people in on that by what it is that you're using and how you're using it.
Yeah.
And one of the other times is actually when I was leaving Kiev, Ukraine, on my way to Moscow. I'm carrying film, and I don't want anybody X-raying any of it.
Absolutely.
So I'm really kind of paranoid about it. And one of the times that I had, when I was leaving Kiev, I was at the airport. I was trying to go through security, and I ran my cameras through, and I was holding onto the film and begging somebody to hand check the film. And which is not normally done there. So they, as far as they're concerned, they don't know what film is, especially the film that I'm using. But my cameras had gone through, and the X-ray technician was looking at the screen, completely confused at what this was. Like, obviously they need to stop the machine. They need to look in my bag because they have no idea what it is that they're even looking at. So everything has to stop. They bring my bag back over, and I'm still holding on to my film, and they want to look through the bag, and I'm sure, have at it, knock yourself out. And they were asking questions about what it was that I was doing there, where was I going, and why did I have these cameras, and what were they? And they're looking at the back of the camera, like, where's the screen that you look at to see the photograph that you made? And I said, these are all mechanical, and they use film, and they were completely in disbelief at what it was that I was doing, and why would you do that? So in the end, they were so confused and fascinated, and they just kind of said, well, you know what? Just take everything and go. Like, that's fine. We don't know what to do about it, so why don't you just go? So they never even bothered to X-ray the film, which I all had in lead bags anyway. But yeah, it actually kind of got them to not X-ray the film because they were interested. I opened up the cameras. I actually took the cameras apart while I was standing there. And
every border crossing is different, isn't it? When you're traveling with film, you end up talking to so many different people. I remember one trip a few years ago. I was shooting 35mm, and I think my film went through maybe 12 X-ray machines. Some of them in parts of the world where they really weren't modern equipment. And I deliberately chosen low speed film. I think the highest speed I had with me was something like 250. And it was fine. There wasn't a single trace of any X-ray damage on any of the films when I got them developed. But after a while, I just think, do you know what? I don't know if I'm going to get any photos out of this trip at all. When they go through like the 8th or 9th X-ray machine, it's
true.
Yeah.
And with Polaroid, you would get, sometimes there would be, because of the way that the pack film is built, there's the kind of open side of the pack, just that first sheet will often get some kind of, sometimes there will be lines formed on it, but not always. And again, it's low speed as well. So, I still don't want anybody to X-ray it, or at least X-ray it as little as possible. Because there were times that they would X-ray it that I didn't know X-ray machines were going to be used. Just walking into some buildings, they're going to X-ray your bag.
I had that, and it's even just to get into the airport terminal, you have to X-ray. It's like, hang on a minute, there's an X-ray machine just about 10 yards away, and then they're going to do it twice. And I'm in line of sight from where I started off, and my stuff's been X-rayed twice.
There's plenty of surprises in that part of the world.
665, isn't it, Michael, that you're using?
665
film, which is like gold dust, isn't it? Today it is like, have you got a stockpile still?
I do. I do have some, and
so for listeners, Michael is showing us some film, which you'll be able to watch on the YouTube video.
Yeah. This is a pack that expired in 2007. Oh, this is a good pack. This is one that expired in 2007. So yeah, to me, this is as good as gold. Yeah. And strangely, like, I'm really picky about the film that I find and will actually purchase now, because, like I was saying about the failure rate, at this point, it's getting to the point where it's almost not worth buying it at all anymore. To find a pack of film that works start to finish is kind of rare. Usually something has gone wrong with it, and now you're always buying it on eBay.
Yeah.
But thankfully, because of friends and because people or social media, and people know that I use this film, I'll often get phone calls or emails or text messages about, hey, so I noticed that so-and-so is selling some 665 film, and it looks like it might be pretty good. You might want to check it out, and I'll reach out to that person and kind of make a determination on whether or not it's worth buying or not. But like I said, I bought I think about 5 packs recently, and I paid $50 a pack, and that was a bargain. And the only reason that I bought it is because I knew that it had been kept safe, and I didn't know the person, but I knew of the person who I bought it from. So I felt good about buying it, and I've only shot 1 pack of it, and it works fine. So.
That's really good. Talking about Polaroid film and prices shooting up. I really like, the red duochrome film that they had, and I'm hoping them again. But I saw some, and there was like 1 pack on Amazon for £500. I mean, that's like crazy. But a lot of film, like you say, if it's expired or it's rare or they don't make it anymore, or just film in general these days, the prices have seemed to have shot up. But 665 is definitely gold dust, isn't it? So.
Right. Well, of all of those original Polaroid pack films, 665 was the first one that they abandoned. The Polaroid Corporation deemed 665 to be the most toxic to make and the most problematic to make. It had more parts to it than any other Polaroid film for some reason. I assume because of the fact that it was a positive negative. And not like I guess type 85 would have been problematic as well. And just to clarify, of the positive negative film, there were 3 that were made. Type 85, which was a pack film that went into Polaroid cameras like swingers. The Holga Polaroid backs took that type of film. All of those 8 series films, and then there was a 665 film that I used, which was also a pack film that started out with 8 sheets, then went to 10 sheets, and then type 55, which was a single sheet 4x5 large format film, and they were all positive negative, but they were all made differently. But 665 was considered to be the problem child of the group, so they bailed on that one first, and then all of the other ones kind of went by the wayside over the years. And I don't even remember now. It was a 2009, I think, that they shut down completely before a possible project showed up and started making the consumer films again, like SX 70 films.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually I don't know if you used any of the Impossible films, Michael, when in the early stages, they were quite unstable, weren't they? And as the stock went on and developed, the stock got better and better and more stable. But some of the Impossible stocks, I missed them. I liked some of the color shifts that you got. I liked some of the instability of the film. But yep, there we go. There we go.
Yeah, that was you know, when the Impossible Project showed up, it was really exciting to know that, because when they did, excuse me, when they did that, immediately there were people who were new to photography who were interested again, because even only that kind of couple of year gap where you weren't able to buy any kind of Polaroid that was new, Impossible Project showed up, and they were doing something. It was the same but different, and honestly, it was a horrible film, and you know, you had to figure out how to make it work for you.
Definitely.
And you know, and it just didn't last. If you liked anything that you got, you kind of had to scan it, because a couple of months later, it wasn't going to be the same.
Yeah, especially
a couple of days later, it wasn't going to be the same.
I found that particularly the black and white film, you could get some really lovely images, and then they would kind of go to that kind of rusty brown. But quite often, sometimes I'd shoot an image and I thought, I wish I had a scanner with me now, because I'd like to just stop it right here. But I've developed habits from Impossible days that I still use today. You know, with the shielding the film. That's a shield it didn't use straight away. Well, Polaroid now, you don't really need to, but I always do. I always I've got this thing. I always put the black tongue, the black shield it and put it away. I don't know why. It's just kind of ingrained in me. Do you have your camera? Do you have your camera to hand? You said you had some cameras to show us. Have you got the one you used on your body of work, An Enduring Grace, the Russia work?
So that body of work and a few of the other, I don't call them bodies of work. The ones that are much smaller, I refer to them as more as collections.
Okay.
Because they don't necessarily have kind of, not that they don't have any intention behind them, but maybe less intention. So those were all photographed with this camera.
Wow.
Especially An Enduring Grace was taken with this camera and this lens. So this is a Graflex XL camera. It became the modular camera that was born out of like Crown Graphics and Speed Graphic 4x5 cameras. Ouija made them famous. They were press cameras that photojournalists were using, but they shot 4x5 film. So in the 60s, the Graflex Corporation came out with this camera. So the backs were interchangeable, the body was interchangeable, the backs were interchangeable, the lenses, the grip. There were different viewfinders that you could get. This one's a rangefinder. So you have to kind of you have to get used to using that if you're not used to using a rangefinder. This uses a 58 millimeter Rodenstock lens that is the only one that I really use on this camera, even though I do have a few other lenses for it. And when I use this one with black and white film, I use the red filter. Because of the red filter and because of the speed of the film, almost always I'm shooting wide open. So, which I like to do because it'll get me a shutter speed that's reasonable, and it will, in terms of kind of forcing perspective a little bit, if I have something predominant in the foreground, that will be, much more out of focus, because when you shoot wide, you get a lot more depth of field. But with this camera, even shooting wide open, if you have something in the foreground, it's going to be out of focus. So you get a lot more depth to the photograph, which I feel kind of really adds a lot to it.
I love wide angle. I love wide angle photography. I love wide angle cinematography. I was watching No Country for Old Men just the other day again, the Coen Brother films, which I love the Coen Brothers, but they shoot a lot of wide angles. I love them. Yeah, it's a beautiful camera, that, Michael.
For some of our listeners, some of our listeners that are less aware of these cameras, I mean, you spoke there about a 58 millimeter lens, but that's a wide lens. Of course, listeners who are more acclimatized to 35 mil film what are not necessarily going to think of a 58mm lens as a wide angle. And what's just for a couple of points of reference, what size are the images that you're shooting, and what equivalent focal length of your, or particularly perhaps an angle of view that lens provides on that camera?
Oh, sure. Yeah, easily. So because I'm shooting with a Polaroid back on this camera, it's shooting the Polaroid full frame. Whereas other Polaroid backs on different types of cameras, like if you were using a Hasselblad, it would be a cropped image. It would be a 6x6 image, but the film itself has I don't know what it is in centimeters, but in inches, it's, what is it? It's 3 1/4 by 4 1/4 inches. So it's a little smaller than 4x5 film, but the negative is that big and the print is that big. And when you shoot full frame with this camera and that lens, it's probably close to a 20mm equivalent.
Yeah, I would have guessed somewhere around there. Yes.
Yeah. So, and honestly, and I can show you this camera too, because this takes it one step further. I started using this camera. It's a Brooks Vera-Wide camera. It uses the same type of system for attaching the backs to it. So what I was initially doing is I would take just the body and the lens, which is, this one you can't change the lens, but this is a 47mm lens. So it's even wider.
Really
so
wide then, yeah.
18mm or something like that. And I really like it, and I started carrying it more often with later bodies of work because of its size. It's smaller, and because it uses the same Polaroid back. At first, I would just take the body and the lens and put it in a lens wrap and throw it in my bag, and it didn't take up that much space. Because space is always at a premium, because I'm carrying the Polaroid film, I need to carry so much of that, and all of the other cameras that I shouldn't be carrying with me as well. But and this one, and the Brooks, I use a yellow filter on, because whereas the 58mm is an f5.6, this is an f8. So to get a reasonable shutter speed with the film that I'm using with this camera, I can't have that much light blocked out by the filters. So originally I was always still using a red filter with it, but then I was getting like 1/8, 1/4 second shutter speeds, and I generally hand hold almost everything that I do on these for all of this work. So I switched to a yellow filter, which still works quite well with it. That way I could get a faster shutter speed out of it.
Yeah. Because you only lose 1 stop with that rather than 3 stops with the red one or something like that. Yeah.
So, and you mentioned filmmaking, and I just wanted to mention that there are a couple of film directors that I think really inform what it is that I'm doing. One of them was, or probably I would say predominantly, it would be Terri Gilliam, of all people.
Okay,
interesting.
From, of course, Monty Python, but he was the sole American in the group. But he and Terry Jones started directing the Monty Python films early on, and then of course he went out on his own and directed other films. And if you watch any of his work, I mean, Brazil, for example, is a really great film to see of his going in, to understand how he was using wide angle lenses and really moving in on people, and doing all of the things that other people weren't doing and maybe shouldn't have been doing. But he really developed his own visual voice by shooting like that. And I was always really kind of drawn to that type of look. So I developed it. I'm obviously not shooting people with it that way, but that's where that kind of wide angle aesthetic.
You may like then some of the cinematography in a relatively recent film called Knives Out, which is it was made just a couple of years ago. I can't remember which. It's on one of the streaming services, maybe Amazon or Netflix or something like that. And it's a good old fashioned Agatha Christie style murder mystery. But a lot of the people shots are shot with very wide lenses, and of course very, very close up to get to get them to fill the frame. So check that one out. That you might like that.
That sounds great. I'm into it. Send me the link.
And I'll have to watch Brazil. So I'll put that one onto my list.
Yeah,
brilliant.
I mean, any of his films really are. You'll see what I'm talking about.
I will definitely, and I can definitely see how the cameras you were using out in Russia would intrigue people and draw people in, because they're beautiful looking cameras. Just a quick question as well. When you go, each trip that you took, how many packs of film would you take for, say, the 2 weeks you were out there, Michael? Just out of curiosity.
Well, yeah, I kind of would allot myself so many frames per day, and that would boil down to how many packs that I would carry with me. So I think initially the idea is that I would shoot 3 packs a day.
Okay.
So if I made 30 successful photographs, whether they were good or not would remain to be seen. But if I could make 30 in a day, that was huge for me. Okay. But there would be days where I would shoot, 2 sheets of film on 1 pack, and that would be it. One would be good and one would not be, or none would be good for that matter. Again, the failure rate is high, and now when I go, I have less film, but I take more of it with me. So I was 2019, beginning of 2019, I was on a trip to Australia. One was in Australia and one was in New Zealand. And I was working there, and I took the cameras with me, and I was working on a different body of work. And, I would just it was kind of a crapshoot. I think I took maybe 5 packs of film on each, or 4 or 5. And I think it was the trip in Australia, only 1 pack worked at all. So, so it was a drag, but I still got some images that I liked. The trip to New Zealand went a little bit better, but again, I at that point, I was literally taking a major portion of the stash of film that I have left. And I don't know how much I have now. Maybe if I have 20 packs, I'd be surprised. So, like you said, kind of treating it like gold, and being very, very selective as to what I use it.
And would you like to return to Russia? I've never been. I'd love to go. I think I have the same kind of visions of it that you had as a child, and then you read characters like Rasputin, and you think, I really want to go to Russia and see all the, like you say, all the brilliant buildings and learn about the culture. But it's so big, isn't it? It's such a huge.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is all of the trips that I went there, and honestly, the surrounding countries, and the reason I went to the surrounding countries for that body of work is because because they were part of the USSR. During, like I said, during my early days of fascination with the USSR, places like Belarus and Ukraine and Estonia, those were all part of it. So they received a gigantic influence in what you will find there. In the time frame of all of history, it was a very short period of time, but within a couple of generations, there was significant changes that were made to the cultures of those other countries that was carried from.
One of the things that opened my eyes to that actually is one of my favorite photo books that I have, which is simply called Soviet Bus Stops. And it is by and I can't remember the name. I'll go get the book in a minute. But the photographer had a particular fascination with Soviet era architecture, and he had discovered by accident at first that whilst architecture was very strictly controlled at the federal level, or the equivalent of the federal level, during the Soviet era, there was one, when you got down to a certain size of building or public structure, it was allowed to be a local decision on the architecture and the aesthetic and the design. And he hit upon this amazing project to travel, it's always the length and breadth of the former Soviet Union to photograph bus stops and to celebrate the local architecture of all the different countries and regions that had been part of the Soviet Union. So
that's great. That's a really interesting point too, about like you said, the governmental, I don't know, overreach that was probably going on with all of the larger federal buildings and administrative buildings, but then they could care less about a bus stop, right? So
yeah,
you're going to get more of the local flavor in something like that.
Yeah, see, next time you go, check out the bus stops, and then that's it. You'll be hooked. You won't be able to see anything. You won't be able to unsee the bus stops.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I would like to go back. It's been a while since I've been. Like I said, I consider that body of work finished for now, and I don't see shooting. If I went back and started, making photographs, it would probably be like kind of a Mark II version of An Enduring Grace, or something entirely different. Maybe I would gravitate to something like bus stops or something a little bit more specific on a future visit. And I would like to go back, especially St. Petersburg. I really loved it there. I mean, that was definitely kind of the cultural hub of Russia.
Yeah.
So I always kind of equate Moscow with a place like Los Angeles, and St. Petersburg is a place like San Francisco.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Moscow is a vast area of land that just seems to go on forever, much like Los Angeles. It's low and wide, and then you go someplace like San Francisco, or compare that to St. Petersburg, a place that's much more condensed, and you can find a lot more interest in a smaller amount of space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't been to San Francisco for 20 years, but I joined the first .com boom. I used to work in the Valley a bit, in Silicon Valley, and made several trips to San Francisco, and it always felt like a manageable size. And I've been to a few places in the USA over the last 30 years or so, and San Francisco always felt one of the most European in its styling. Even compared to sort of downtown Manhattan with all of the Dutch influence on architecture, it always felt like San Francisco had a much more sort of European city feel to it.
Right.
But I can see what you mean about it. But what the difference between LA and San Francisco is sort of Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, St. Petersburg was modeled after Italian and French and Dutch cities and architecture. So it was basically designed and built by Peter the Great, and he was informed by the architecture and the culture in places like that. So that carried over into what we see as St. Petersburg today.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Now,
there's a lot more to it. That's very small.
Yeah. So we set ourselves out at the top of this conversation to talk about several collections of yours, as well as methods for travel and cameras and stuff like that. And we've had I'm really enjoying this conversation. We've had a big deep dive. I suspect, Claire, we've covered maybe just step one on our list of things.
We were going to talk about your another collection, vignettes, which was kind of your street scenes, which you if you want to talk us about that, how that came about, and you shot them on a toy camera, yeah?
Yeah, I shot those all with a Holga toy camera.
Love
very
a Holga.
popular now.
I love a Holga too.
Yeah.
Holga.
So I started using Holgas in I don't remember now, 1995 maybe.
Okay.
And they weren't so popular.
Mm.
They were even more of a niche kind of camera. They're far more popular now. But I really like with using Polaroid and Graflex cameras. I liked what I was getting. I liked that very kind of surreal, dreamy quality that I was getting from it. And I realized, later that they were basically modeled after the Diana toy camera,
which I love.
And I had one of those at one point, but it kind of fell apart. I paid some crazy amount of money for it.
I mean, I'm completely with you. I love Holga cameras. I love Diana cameras. I know if Graham was here now, our other co-host, he'd be going, no, he really doesn't like Diana cameras. But I got my first Holga camera. I think for me it was about 2008. I think it was. For me, I don't know what got you into a Holga, but for me, I'd seen a body of work by is it Nancy Rexroth?
Oh, yeah.
She'd done this just beautiful, to me, body of work that she'd done all on a Holga camera. And it was just wonderfully surreal and dreamy, but the images were beautiful. And when I read that was a Holga, I thought, I have to have one of these cameras. And they were affordable. And so that's how I got into Holgas. So you did your whole collection vignette in different countries, because I've seen you're on top of Paris, and then you've been in London as well. So what was your thinking around that collection, Michael?
Well, it was basically, sometimes a body of work will form out of your intention for creating it. You'll have an idea, and you'll figure out what the tools are that you want to use to make that idea a reality.
Yeah.
And then other times there'll be a body of work that you'll look back over your years, and you will realize that you've been doing things a certain way all of this time without really knowing it, until you've had this moment of clarity in hindsight as to what it was that you've been doing all along. So Vignette was born out of that idea. So it came about out of the editing process more than within any kind of intention. I mean, it continues with intention, but it wasn't born that way.
Okay.
So it was really the fact that I had just been, I always, since the late 90s, I had been carrying a Holga with me anytime I traveled, anytime I went places. But it was particularly on a trip to Prague in 1998 that I came back, and looking through the proof sheets I'm showing them to other people. There was a really, there was a kind of a moment of, like an epiphany, like what I was doing, I was really loving, and it felt much more personal and much more, there was more of me in the photographs than anything else I was doing. Because also, I mean, this entire time I'm also a commercial photographer. So when you're taking photographs for other people, there are a lot of other people who are chiming in as to how the photograph is supposed to look, or they have certain standards and policies as to how an image is supposed to look and be, in order to get the point across for the client. So that was really when I was kind of taking photographs for myself in a big way, and it's probably when I really kind of got into doing fine art from the commercial work. So that was an early indicator of what it was that I was working on. But at the same time, I was making prints and just kind of setting them aside, and then I would make new photographs, go on other trips, and make photographs occasionally. And then at a certain point, I just kind of I was scanning more often, and then making my own prints digitally, actually, from that, because I kind of work out a way to do them outside of the darkroom which was a trial by fire, but I was able to make digital prints the way I was making gelatin silver prints initially, and still be able to get still get the point across that I was doing. Yeah. So during that time, I started scanning more and more of my older Holga negatives, and I realized that they were they were street scenes, but they had a specific look and they had a specific attitude that I was kind of capturing along the way without really knowing it. So through editing, hundreds of rolls of film, going through proof sheets, I made a small selection of images and then just kind of continued doing it from there. And it's really the only other body of work that I consider to be kind of ongoing. Yes, so some of the earlier pictures, I think I say that the collection started in 1990. I don't remember, 97 or 98. Might have been with one of the photographs from Prague, all the way to now. So they're basically just slices of life. They're street photography, but they're done, with my own kind of point of view, as much as you can get out of a Holga. Because a lot of times when you use a Holga, you'll realize that your images start to kind of they look like Holga images, and they look like what other people had done with their Holgas. So it becomes harder and harder to set yourself apart in using a tool like that, because you're very limited in what you can do with it. You have to get very creative in terms of the point of view or the perspective or the content that photographs are doing. So it's a much less serious body of work, but because it's a Holga and because I had fun doing it to begin with, it's still a fun body of work to work on. And it's just, and I don't do anything differently. It's still just me carrying around a Holga on trips that I take, whether they're local or international. I just kind of keep one with me all the time.
Do you use one, Aid? Do you ever use a Holga?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple. I got into it because I'd always fancied having to go with a Holga, and then they stopped making them. What, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 5, a bit more than that now. And I thought, I always wanted to do that, and I never got around to it. So I bought 3 of them, just in case. And I gave one to Graham, who I don't think he's ever used it ever. But the 2 that I kept for me, I've done plenty with those over the years. It was the camera that helped me learn to just let go. As Michael, as you said, you don't have any choice, right? There's very few buttons and dials on a Holga, right? You've got to be creative. But because my entry into photography, and part of what drives my enthusiasm for it is that I can see things, I can imagine things, but I have no motor skills to do drawing or painting or anything like that. And so photography is a way I can use a machine to capture the thing that I'm seeing. It sort of helps me overcome my lack of ability to draw or paint or sculpt or anything like that. And so as a result, and as part of my nature, I've always been a bit of a control freak around it. And of course, with a Holga, you can't do that. You can't be a control freak with a Holga. So it's been a part of my psychological evolution over the course of my photography history, using a Holga, which it's a year and a bit ago, I slimmed down my camera collection quite considerably, but I definitely kept the 2 Holgas.
Yeah,
I mean, it levels the playing field, as it were. So. Anybody can pick one up and just start shooting with it and get something interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think I'd ever fall out of love with the Holga. I do think they're quite special. With your Above Paris picture, I like. Where were you where did you shoot that image from? Where were you?
I was on top of the Arc de
Ah, right. Okay, you were on top. Wow.
So on top of there, they have those little, I don't know, telescopes, spotting scopes. And there was a kid who was fascinated with the Eiffel Tower from a distance. And it just, it was one of those moments, as it is with pretty much every photograph in the collection. It's me just kind of looking over and seeing something going on and just immediately reacting to it. And that's the beauty of the Holga too, is because you're not monkeying around with a bunch of dials or buttons. There aren't a lot of options. You just point the camera and press the button, and that's it. It's all you can do. So.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great shot as well, because for me, the issue you get when you go traveling to these cities and you want to get is that the best views are usually from the top of the famous monuments, isn't it? It's like, well, where do you go when you're in New York? Which I much prefer the top of the Rock in New York to the top of the Empire State Building. Not because I don't like the Empire State Building. Going up the Empire State Building is something that's really special, but you get a much better view from the top of the Rock, including of the Empire State Building.
Right. That's right.
But you were saying earlier that the certain looks and aesthetics carry through your work. So that kind of cinematicness and that kind of otherworldliness is definitely within this kind of collection as well. And also what you were saying earlier about what points of views you choose to shoot your images, the angles, I think, are all interesting. So that intrigued me. I wondered where you were on that image.
And honestly, I shoot both similarly.
Yeah.
The Graflex or Brooks Very Wide cameras, there's a lot of time, especially with the Brooks Very Wide and with the Holga, like I don't even bother looking through the camera. When you develop a rapport with a certain camera, you kind of know what you're gonna get when you point it in a certain direction. So I'm often just kind of hunched over, holding cameras down at my knees or lower, or just setting them on the ground and kind of tipping them up and pushing the button without looking through, because I can already I know them well enough to know what I'm going to get. So, that kind of shooting from the hip style, it also, like I said, it lends itself to how I'm already creating images anyway. And everything is very kind of, loose, as it were. So it just works for me. And it does for other people too. I mean, I see other people doing the same thing, and I, you get some really nice surprises at the end as well.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever tried that sort of shooting.
I think you'd be quite good at it.
Yeah, I'm going to try it, Michael. Honestly, that's kind of inspired me thinking of.
I expect to see some results very soon.
Okay, you will.
It'll make the beaches of Anglesey look even more special.
Yeah, no, but I'll be intrigued to see what comes out. Yeah, I've never done that. Never sort of like not looked through them. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with your work too, and it would make sense. I mean, I think it's a way of shooting and that makes sense with what it is that you already are working on. So
yeah. So and it's good to meet a fellow person that loves toy cameras as well and hold. Aid, shall we? And any more images you want to pick out from that collection, or are we going to go on to Sanctuary?
Let's go to Sanctuary again. So I just want to make sure that we're being respectful of Michael's time as well. So we're not running over, outstaying our welcome in your day.
Well, it's probably my fault I get long-winded on some of these.
No, it's really interesting. It's lovely hearing your approach and your process and everything that you do, from the film you choose and those wonderful cameras. With this collection of work, Sanctuary, please tell listeners, because I was completely the thing that got me was how this collection came about and what kind of inspired this collection. You can tell this was
sure. Yeah, it's a little bit. And honestly, and I'll be honest with you, I'm actually probably going to rewrite the artist statement so that it actually will lessen one part of what it is that you're talking about. Anyway, I'll just get to it. So Sanctuary is also created with Polaroid positive negative film. In other than vignette that I work on, sporadically and casually. Sanctuary is the only body of work that I'm currently working on actively and doing it with what is left of the Polaroid positive negative film that I've got. I'm probably using the Brooks VeriWide more than the Graflex, although I'm still using both. And it's a body of work that it's called Sanctuary because, again, when I was a child, everything goes back to when I was a child.
Great, yeah.
To seek therapy. I was a child and I fell in love with the movie Logan's Run.
Who did?
It was probably it had it's odd that it did because it has a very adult theme to it, and but which I did not pick up on necessarily when I was a kid, but what I did pick up on was the theme of seeking a place like Sanctuary.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. Rather than getting into the whole narrative of Logan's Run, basically the antagonists and the two lead roles were seeking a place known as Sanctuary. They were living in a modern utopia, and the outside world was basically kind of left behind. And this place called Sanctuary was kind of a place of legend, a place that people would run to, hence Logan's Run. So they found themselves on the run, seeking this place called Sanctuary, which they, spoiler alert, they find. And probably the most telling scene in the movie is when they emerge from kind of an underground bunker type of situation into the outside world for the very first time. They walk into the sun setting directly in front of them, and they're blinded by something that they had never seen before. And they're fascinated with it. They're intrigued by it. They're probably a little bit scared by it, but they feel like, it's like they found home. They found their sanctuary. They found some place where they feel safe and comfortable and at peace. So that became not just the name of the body of work, but the idea. So the thought was, what is it that I consider to be my sanctuary?
Yeah.
And much like the film, it was kind of the outside world. It was Mother Nature, the landscape. And whereas I had been doing a lot of work that was architecture based and travel based, I wanted to kind of explore doing more traditional landscape work, but with the same kind of aesthetic that I did my other work with.
Yeah.
So that's how it came about. So there's a lot of images of, there's trees and typical landscape, but I'm also seeking out kind of more unique landscapes as well. So I'm going places like Trona Pinnacles in California, which is a very unique location. Gets used a lot for movie locations. Vasquez Rocks is another one that's used for movie locations here that I photographed for that body of work.
The Trona Pinnacles, I was going to ask you about actually, because that image is just, well, it's epic, isn't it? And it's just, it's epic. It's a magnificent image, and it's got all that kind of dreamy quality, and I just love it, and the contrast. And I was going to ask you where exactly that was, because it really just does look magnificent. Trona Pinnacles, yeah. It's
literally kind of in the middle of nowhere in California in the desert. It's easy to get to, but problematic in that the road going in is very rough. You don't have to have a 4-wheel drive vehicle to get to it by any means, but it's a very bumpy, it's a very bumpy ride. But it's worth seeking out and visiting. Whether you're going to take photographs or not, it's very unique, and it is, as you see it in my photograph, to a certain degree, in that it looks kind of like a bit of an alien landscape. If not for the fact that there's clearly some dirt roads running through there. I mean, it gets used as a landscape. I think films that are set in places like Mars are made there.
Okay. I was going more with the whole Sergio Leone aesthetic, but yeah.
Well, there's that too, and I'm sure there are plenty of there's a lot of older westerns that were done there, and much the same as Vasquez Rocks, which is another image that in that body of work, which honestly right now is a fairly small collection of images. However, the last several years, I've still been continuing to make photographs of them. I just haven't finished working on the images, so it'll probably double in size very soon. Maybe larger. In fact, I'll probably make it much larger and then edit it back down again. It's just depending on how people react to certain photographs.
But that Kona Pinnacles one really stood out to me, and the sky is just so dramatic, and the wideness. It's just epic, isn't it? And the other one, forgive me, Michael, I don't know the title of it, but again, it's a low angle, and then it's the tree right up. Into that's great as well.
That's the redwood image, and that's actually again kind of going back to what I was talking about in terms of forming a collection out of a past edit. I ended up pulling, even though Sanctuary became a new body of work, I actually found images that I had taken in the past that fit the collection quite well. So that photograph was made in 2000, and I think it was 2000. And at the time, that was the world's tallest redwood tree.
Okay.
And kind of how do you photograph the world's tallest redwood tree when you can't get back far enough to see it without it being obscured by all the other trees in the area? So the solution was to stand right at the base and just look straight up at it, and to kind of get that that epic look to it. And ironically, 6 months after I took that photograph, it was struck by lightning and became the third tallest redwood tree.
Wow. That was one of those fortuitous moments that you were there when you were. That is a great image.
It does. It doesn't look the same.
I think AIDS. Are you looking at the collection there, AIDS?
I am. Yeah, definitely. It's I think you picked out some of the ones that I would have picked out as well. The other one that took note, and actually is a place I've been actually, is Mono Lake in Nevada. The alien landscape of all of the I don't know, the rock deposits there. I guess they're salt deposits that or calcified rock in some way, aren't they? So
right, I think they're called tufa, Tufa. Okay. I forget what exactly they're made up of. I forget off the top of my head. So I don't want to just guess, but it's very unique. And honestly, a lot of what you're seeing in Trona Pinnacles is that same kind of
is it? Okay.
Geographic formation.
Yeah, a long time ago, I did a bit of a tour around California and up through Nevada. So I did the drive from Vegas to Reno. And then over the border, over the mountains, and over the border back down to San Francisco. There's just so much to see as you drive along, through the Sierra Nevada and through Death Valley and all this crazy landscape.
Yeah, there's a very diverse landscape in California alone. I mean, I definitely travel traveled outside of California for this body of work, but there are quite a lot that are in California that if you don't already know, you would never identify them as a place like California.
Yeah.
So when you're busy traveling and taking all these amazing images with all your different collections, how do you find time to write, Michael? Because you also don't you?
Well, a lot of this work was done before I kind of taken on these newer roles that I've been doing. Like the writing and everything that I've been doing for, I'm sure you're referring to Analog Forever magazine and Catalyst interviews, and the Traverse column at 112 Publishing. All three of which I have to do a fair amount of writing for, mostly for Analog Forever. That one takes the most amount of time. But doing all of these side projects, they're essentially passion projects, and they were, like you're doing this podcast and you're seeking out all these people who do different types of work, and you want to discuss it, and you want to learn about it and learn from it. It's basically the same kind of thing that I'm doing. Just, it's just not in a podcast format. But I'm intrigued and fascinated by the work that other people do. So early on in the kind of, when I entered the quote unquote fine art realm of photography, I was, showing a lot of work, and you get a lot of, you get positive and negative reactions, but you realize what a tight-knit community of people that it is. And that was something that I wasn't getting in the commercial side of things, because, there's a lot of competition. There's things that center around money more than anything else. There's a lot of creativity, but it's often kind of skewed by other people, in the industry that you're working with. Whereas the fine art work, you're able to portray your vision and your aesthetic how you see fit. And when, you're more of an artist. So now you're dealing with all these other artists and you're learning from them. I can't tell you enough about how heartwarming that is and how fulfilling that is. I get as much out of providing that for people as I get out of doing my own work now. So that's become just it's become a different avenue that I'm going down. So it's more about writing and curation and reaching out to the community, and forming bonds with these people. You become friends with people that you didn't know over artwork, and I mean, there's wonderful experience, as you well know.
That's definitely something that is right at the heart of why I love to do podcasting. It's just the people that you get a chance to meet and to talk with, and sometimes make art with. Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a collaboration too, right? Sometimes you'll actually go in on a body of work or start to make a body of work with another person, whether they're another photographer, or maybe they're a painter or a poet, or a writer for that matter. So that collaborative aspect, it goes across all segments of the art community, it forms that community, and it strengthens that community like nothing else. So being able to do that for Analog Forever and Catalyst and 112 Publishing, it keeps me in on the process, right? It keeps me motivated. It keeps me creative in a different way. And while I never really thought of myself as a writer, again, going back to when I was a kid, I always thought that photography was a wonderful thing, but all of the stuff that you have to use in photography, whether it's digital film, it's the cameras and the lenses and all the bits and pieces that go with it, the lighting gear, there's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of things that you need to use in order to make it happen. And I always admired writers because you could literally show up with a pad of paper and a pencil and get your job done. And I thought, wow, how great would it be to not have to have all that other stuff to make what it is that you want to do. So now I kind of get to do that. Even though I mean, honestly, I have no formal training as a writer. I really write the way I speak for the most part, and then edit it so that it's coherent. But it's been a great learning process as well. And you know, I look back at some of the earlier articles that I did, and I feel a little bit embarrassed by them. Other people don't. You know, everybody's always very nice about it, but you know, you always find need for improvement with anything that you do, right? Anything creative. So.
It's like that with your photos, isn't it? Like I always stayed on Flickr. I know some people moved off Flickr and people have opinions about it, but I stayed on, and I've still got photos that I have got on there that I've kept up from, I don't know, 2000 and probably like 2007 or 8, because I like to see what I was taking in that kind of journey. But you can say, can't you? You can look at sometimes a photograph and you think, oh, if I was to do it now, I might do this differently. But you know, but I don't know where you get your time. You know, your time. Have you ever done any writing aid?
Well, that's it.
I've done a lot of writing, not in the sense that we're talking about here, but in my professional work, which is, you know, is nothing to do with photography, is very corporate oriented, and you know, I've written any number of reports and business cases and papers and things like that. It's one of the reasons that my method of communication on the internet is usually through audio, because I do you know, a lot of writing that that is less fun, and so you know, for me, writing isn't fun really, because there's too much of writing that I have to do that is not fun. But you know, it's yeah, the talking I can do. Just, you know, and I find podcasting a very good medium, because of course nobody talks back. So you know, I can talk as long as I like. I like the internet as a one-way system, you know.
Right. But you're right. Like, writing is extremely difficult.
It is.
Anybody who's ever had to string more than one sentence together knows that that's true.
Yeah.
And when it's more formal like that, it does. You know, I'm sure there's probably plenty of people who write very formally that really enjoy the process. But if I have to do that and it becomes less enjoyable to me, I'm just not going to do it. And I think that that's where I find the struggle too with some of this that I'm doing in terms of writing, is I often feel like I need to be more formal in writing. So I try to push myself in that direction, but the more I push myself in that direction, the less enjoyable it gets. And then I think it suffers because of that. So I'm trying to make it better, but I'm making it worse at the same time.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, that, isn't it? You know, you if you stray away or trying to force the voice, you end up making it harder to both write and then harder to read as well.
Right. And honestly, like the only, for Catalyst interviews, the only real writing that I do is just a short introduction. But I don't do it like it's not a formal bio. It's not even necessarily a bio at all of the person, because I actually put their own bio into it. But I literally kind of write them stream of consciousness. I literally just sit down and I think, what is it about this work, or what is it about this person that brought me to their work in the first place? And how do I see it in the overall landscape of fine art photography? And I'll just start to write. And sometimes there's a theme to it. Sometimes it's more specific about their aesthetic. And sometimes it's about none of those things. But I kind of find a way to bring the points together at the end to make it a point that it is something that I'm interested in finding more about, and asking questions of this person. So when I write that way, it's a lot easier, and it's usually shorter as well. And truth be told, especially online, people are more apt to read something that's shorter rather than longer. Long form writing is great, but in kind of examining who's reading these articles and how much time they're spending on them, through all of the kind of analytics that you have at your disposal, you realize that the longer articles people aren't really reading. They're not clicking on them, and they're not reading them. They're reading the short snippets more than anything else.
Even if they're interested in the artist, because I think it's a skill, isn't it, between your writing and then your kind of the selection of the artists that are shown. I remember one that's springing to mind is the interview, the feature on is it Louis Daisy? I really like it. I really like his work, and I remember that being there. Yeah. And it was lovely to see Stefano in Catalyst as well, you know.
Actually, he was the last one that I did for Traverse. That's what.
Was it Traverse? I'm muddling. Yeah, he was great. Yeah. He did a lovely body of work.
It gets confusing with all the different things. Yeah. Well, and that's what's interesting too, though, is that when I'm trying to find out what other people are doing, I can kind of plug them into one of the three, right?
Yeah.
You know, Analog Forever is obviously the work has to be created through analog means. Yeah. Traverse is all work created. It's creative work, creative photography from outside of the U.S. It's basically, I want to know what people are in other countries are doing and what they're working on, and where's the connection, and where's that through line that we have together, even though we grew up in different cultures. And then there's Catalyst Interviews, which is basically just anybody. It's digital. It's analog. It's it gives me the opportunity to include people that I can't include in the other places. So, so there's work that I can look at any time and kind of, hopefully find a place. If I'm interested enough, I can find a place for it.
I think it's really good that you've got multiple outlets that allow you to enjoy and explore different types of medium. I think it makes me sad a little in a way that sometimes the world of photography can be divided by some very strong opinions and feelings, often of that's not proper photography because X or because Y, and but it's nice. It's good that I think maybe as we record this in the spring of, or at least in the Northern Hemisphere, in the spring of 2021, maybe the world is a little bit more relaxed now about the differences between film and digital and things like that. Maybe there's not so many flame wars on the internet as there used to be. I don't know, but or maybe I just got bored and don't read those channels anymore.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a very good point, because it's the same argument. Is the film or digital argument is essentially the same as, I like Canon or I like Nikon. It's the same thing. Like, those are cameras or those are photography. While I show a lot, I'll predominantly show analog or hybrid processes for Analog Forever, it has to fit that mold to a certain degree. I'm more of the mind that I don't care how you make a photograph. I don't care what it is that you use. It doesn't even have to look like a photograph in the end for me to find interest in it. It's an art form, and it's wide-reaching, and it doesn't have to follow any kind of rules or guidelines for it to be valid. The whole argument of what makes a good photograph, that's going to be a question, forever. Like, it's never going to be answered.
No, and that comes through actually. if you just look at, as I'm doing now, I have a browser window open at analogforevermagazine.com, and I just simply clicked on the menu option, all articles. And if you look at the header images, what you've just said there, Michael, really comes through, because some of those I wouldn't consider, I wouldn't recognize and immediately go, oh yeah, that's a photograph. It's definitely art, right? And it's definitely very artistic, and there's definitely a lot of craft that's gone into making the art, but not all of it would I instantly jump to, oh, that's a photograph. Some of it I would, but it's great to see such a diverse body of work just on one page. Actually, just looking at these header images, one page in front of me, I can scroll down. Sorry, I'll stop scrolling and focus on the conversation, actually, because well we should probably start to wrap up here a bit, just to let you escape, really, and maybe our listeners as well, because we've been talking for probably a good hour and a half, maybe longer at this point. So a fantastic conversation, fascinating, and thank you ever so much for joining us. I mean, we've talked about a number of your collections. We've talked about a number of your channels for communicating across the art world. We'll definitely have links in the show notes. I mean, to recap them for everybody, we can find your own work, your own photography at michaelkirchoff.com. And then the your writing at analogforevermagazine.com, catalystinterviews.com, and 112publishing.com. I think those were the main ones. Have I missed any out?
That's it.
Oh, that's great. There's certainly, for everybody that's interested in this conversation, there's certainly a lot of follow-up work to be taken advantage of.
Yeah. Oddly, I hate talking about myself, and then people start asking me questions, and I can't stop talking. So I apologize if I've been long-winded or
it's been
the show too long.
Really great.
That kind of makes you a perfect podcast guest. So we're very pleased about that, aren't we, Claire?
Definitely.
You could have just started with hello and just let me keep going.
Well, listen, Michael, thank you very much once again for joining us to talk about your work. It's been a fascinating conversation. Fascinating, and as I say, lots to dive into, and I'll certainly be diving into all of that myself. Any last thoughts? Well, I guess Claire or Michael, any last thoughts, or any last pointers to leave us with?
Not from me. I think I've said too much.
No,
no, not at all.
No, I would just encourage listeners to go online at michaelkirchoff.com and have a look at these different collections, and have a look at all the images that belong in each of these collections that we've been discussing. And also you'll be able to see us talking on YouTube as well. So, and you can see some of these images as well for yourself in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, and on that note, I guess it's time to wrap up the show. So we have been the Sunny 16 podcast. Thank you to producer John, who isn't with us for the conversation, but has kindly volunteered to do a lot of the editing and post-production work in the background. Thank you, John. You can find us on the internet. We are the Sunny 16 podcast pretty much everywhere. If you're in any doubt, start at Sunny 16 what's our web address? sunny16podcast.com. Start from there and branch out into the media empire we've set up over the last few years. We will play you out now with Rachel's band Rocker, whose album Promises I Should Have Kept you can find on Amazon and iTunes and I think Spotify and Bandcamp, and I know that list changes every time I say it. One day I'll get a proper list from Rachel herself. It's been an honor and a privilege to talk with you all. We'll see you next week. Take care. Goodbye. Bye.